Welcome back to the Random Alpha Labs, evidently. No, this is not a lab. And why are you going... Excuse me, I'm trying to film a video here. Right in front of me, I have the three Macs that I personally own. My obviously brand new 16-inch M1 Pro MacBook Pro, first ever Mac, my 2011 13-inch MacBook Pro, my 2009 iMac 20-inch. Evidently I have to specify because there's a 20 and a 24-inch. This is a 20-inch. For the longest time, I have been stuck using this MacBook Pro and this iMac. And let's just say I had quite a bit of an issue using both of them. Common theme being they're very slow. Now that I've gotten this new thing here and is such a beast, I actually wanted to compare how this thing here performs compared to not just my MacBook here, because I mean the MacBook here performs better than my iMac. I had to stop using my iMac about a year ago because graphics is dying, and as a video editor you need the graphics to actually do your work. Yeah, switch back to this thing. But I've been so curious to see how does not just this slow thing compare to my new MacBook, but also my 20-inch iMac. How do these compare? Let's figure that out. Okay, so I downloaded a few benchmarks that a lot of people quite commonly use, though it's not that many. I've downloaded like 3 separate benchmarks, like Geekbench, Cinebench R23, as well as the Blackmagic speed test. And then I did one more test that involved exporting a video, the most power demanding thing that I do with my laptop or Mac in general, because I mean this thing's not a laptop. But point being, I honestly wanted to do a personal workflow test, but my problem is I don't actually have enough time to create my own personal benchmarks for these things. That's why there's a lot of industry standard ones that we'll be using today. Though eventually I am going to actually work on making real benchmarks that more represent my workflow and what it is I do with these things. But as of now, I don't think that's going to matter that much because there's a really huge difference between the way this thing performs and these two. I don't think I need my personal benchmarks for this just to show off how big a performance difference these things are going to be. So, alright, yeah, I know this is dumb. Why are you clicking on a performance comparison between this and computers from like 10 years ago? Anywho, we'll start off with Geekbench. I ran 2 different versions of Geekbench on my 16-inch MacBook Pro, and the reason for that is ARM and Intel. Because the performance on this I already predicted was going to be really bad, I actually wanted to run a benchmark to handicap the performance on this thing just to see if these two here can get a chance, and well, the numbers don't really do them any favors. Here's what I mean. When I did the Geekbench single core test on the 20-inch iMac, it got a very embarrassing 394. That's the score for single core on the iMac here. Moving up to the 13-inch MacBook Pro here from 2011, we got a single core score of 572. Yeah, not the best either. I mean, they're usable, but yeah, not really the world's greatest, if you ask me. What does this 16-inch MacBook Pro here get with my testing? So I ran both an Intel version and a native version. What I mean by that is I used Rosetta to emulate the Intel version of Geekbench, and yeah, believe it or not, there's actually an easy way to actually force the Mac to run the Intel version of an app. I actually did that, and my results, well, I don't think they really did these two any favors, because I mean the MacBook only got like a score of almost 600. Handicapping the performance of this thing here, it still got like more than double at 1347. That is the single core score just with it running Rosetta. So what does this thing run full blown? Full blown native ARM, you get a total score of 1772. That's native, and that's just a single core score. This has one of the highest single core scores in, well, the industry. So that's kind of cool to know. So what happens when we jump to multi-core? And well, yeah, I guess that's not going to do these two older machines any other favors because they're both running dual core processors. Meanwhile, this guy here is running a 10 core. Yeah, these two definitely aren't going to have many advantages, especially considering when I handicapped the performance on this again, because of course I ran the Rosetta version as well. The 20-inch iMac, I like doing this just to start off the lowest. 20-inch iMac, we have a multi-core score of 682. Makes sense, that's roughly double of the single core, because I mean it's a Core 2 Duo, what do you expect? My 13-inch MacBook Pro here, shut off. My 13-inch MacBook Pro here, we got a score of 1274. That's one of the reasons why I actually decided not to use this anymore. It's just so that way I had some processing power that was usable, though honestly the kind of power I was looking for was GPU, which the graphics in this thing was dying anyway, so okay, yeah, onto that. So what happens if we tried to handicap the performance of the 16-inch here just to give these two a fair chance? Well, even when we did that, we still didn't really get them a fair chance, because we got a multi-core score of 9775 on this thing. That's with the performance handicapped, and when we go full-blown, we get an absolute crazy score of 12,504. That is the native score that this thing can achieve for a multi-core score. That is crazy. So we also moved on to Geekbench Compute, except we had a slight problem. For some reason, and I kind of expected that running benchmarks on this thing would be a little bit of trouble because this thing is running an operating system it shouldn't be. With that, there are a lot of applications, in fact, including the latest version of iMovie. I've discovered that anything that requires a lot of GPU power on, well, macOS Catalina on foreign hardware, it doesn't really like it. Unfortunately, I could not get the Geekbench Compute to run on this thing, and I kind of expected that because, well, it's a bit of a janky setup right now. The 13-inch, on the other hand, kind of surprised me because guess what? It also couldn't run Geekbench Compute. No idea why, and the hardware in here is completely original. Original hard drive, original memory, original CPU and GPU. I mean, does Geekbench Compute look for a dedicated graphics card or something? Because I know this says integrated, but then again, I don't think that's the case because I got Compute to work on this thing, and this thing has integrated graphics because that's the design of the M1 Pro SoC. Anywho, yeah, I mean, I expected that some things were not going to work on this, and that's fine because it's a bit of a janky setup and it's old. But I expected that because this thing is running an operating system it is allowed to, and that it's running its original hardware, why is it having a problem? Anywho, fail, to be expected. Fail, not to be expected. So what did this thing get? Did we get a fail here too? No, actually we were able to run Geekbench Compute, and here's what we got. So for an OpenCL, that's not exactly an optimized benchmark anymore because Apple goes full metal now. They've ditched OpenCL like a long time ago. I could not actually run an Intel version of this, not that would have mattered anyway because these two couldn't even run it. We got an OpenCL score of 37,510. That's OpenCL. When we go to Metal, the more optimized version, because Apple loves Metal, we get a score of 41,313. Yeah. Kind of ridiculous numbers. Alright, so that's it for Geekbench. Now we're going to move on to my Cinebench results and see how they fared in there. With my Cinebench R23 results, let's start with the iMac. Oh, we didn't even get past the booting screen. Yeah, Cinebench R23 didn't run on this, even though it actually should be able to, but then again, janky setup here. I kind of expect some things not to work on this, so yeah, fail to be expected. But once again, just like Geekbench Compute, not even this thing was able to run Cinebench R23, which I'm very shocked. I mean, I looked at the support and yeah, able to run on this version of macOS as well as it should be able to run on this hardware because I checked out the hardware spec requirements and yeah, it should be able to run on this, but once again, we had the same problem. We could not get past the boot screen. So once again, the 16-inch here is taking it solo, and let's just take a look at those scores real quick. With a single core score, I have to quickly recall because Cinebench does multiple laps of the same same thing. It's a over time test. In this case, it's a time span of 10 minutes. Within a time span of 10 minutes, it was able to start 2 laps of the same project. And what did we get for a single core score? We got a single core score of 1531. That's not bad. That really is not bad for a single core score. And then for a multi-core score, when we did the multi-core test, it managed to do roughly 1 lap per minute. Yeah, it was able to start 10 laps within 10 minutes. That is absolutely nuts. And when we finished it up, we got a multi-core score of 12,372. That is absolutely nuts. And this thing actually brought up a comparison between other chips and processors. This ranked 4th place compared to like server grade desktop class processors, including the 64, I think it had like a 32 core AMD Threadripper, 28 core Xeon, which makes sense. 28 core Xeon, and the reason why they're scoring more is because they're like objectively more cores, and these are server grade chips, and AMD's 64 core Threadripper CPU as well. I mean, yeah, it kind of expects that this thing would fall behind them slightly because, I mean, we're comparing like 10 cores to 32, 28, and 64. Makes sense, but the point is that this thing is ranking straight behind them, and those are desktop chips, and this is a laptop. That is crazy. Absolutely crazy. And the last test that you can download off of the App Store and such like that, we did the Blackmagic disk speed test, and that's because, believe it or not, this was actually something I'm curious about, and I was actually shocked at the results of this thing. I mean, yeah, obviously this thing performed better because it's got an SSD, but actually between the 2 hard drives on the MacBook and the iMac here, I was a little shocked. Let's actually talk about that. First thing we did is the Blackmagic write speed test on the disks. Here comes the shocker. On the 20-inch iMac, we got a score of 59.3 megabits per second. That is the write speeds on the hard drive in here. The hard drive in the 13-inch, on the other hand, that's an interesting one, and the reason I say that is because we're actually slower at 27.4 megabits per second. This thing will write to a drive faster than this thing, and you know what? I think that actually makes a little bit of sense due to some previous usage within the past few years. So yeah, that is very interesting. Oh, and what did the 16-inch get for a write score? Let's just say 5.3 gigabits per second. Not megabits, gigabits. 5.3 gigabits. Which, if you need me to translate that to megabits, it's 5,402.5 megabits a second. So yeah, we got 5.3 gigabits a second. That is crazy. Oh wait, I was looking at the wrong score. Oh yeah, it was 5.4 gigabits per second. That's what we got. All right, and speaking of the read test, because not only do you write to hard drives, but you also read them as well. Once again, the same trend continues, which really shocks me. The iMac has a score of 70.8 megabits a second, while the 13-inch MacBook Pro 60.7 megabits a second. Yeah, that's kind of odd. What did the 16-inch here get? We got a ridiculous score of 5.3 gigabits a second. Yeah, kind of expected considering that this has, well, some of the fastest SSDs on the planet compared to 2 hard drives. Makes sense. I was kind of curious just to see the speeds on that, which I found interesting. The hard drive in my iMac is faster than the hard drive in my MacBook. Not entirely sure why. Even though I did check the About This Mac section, and the hard drives are spinning at the same speed. Kind of odd. Alright, and now we're going to get to the real reason why I actually got this new laptop here. Well, I mean, in part, it was also because I needed a bigger screen compared to my 13-inch MacBook Pro here, because, oh, I hate working off of small screens. But either way, I still had other issues like performance issues, because, I mean, this thing was very slow. This thing was slow, and this thing is very comfortable, I'll say. So let's actually talk about the numbers that this thing took. The video export I did, I originally wanted to make my own 4K edit, but my problem was, I needed a hard drive to store it on, and unfortunately, the one I actually got to store it on failed like 3 days later. Yeah, that sucks. So, that's getting sent back, and I don't have a place to store all of my test projects on. And then the other reason why I didn't do it is because I just didn't have the time to make it. So we're just gonna work with what we've got. So the video that I chose to export on all 3 computers is actually the MacBook Pro unboxing video. And the reason why is because this is a slightly more challenging one to export, considering that it's 26 minutes long and it's a 1080p 60. I want to do 4K okay, but once again, I just couldn't store the projects. Yeah, kind of sucks. So we're basically going to do a little heavier than my standard workflow. I usually try to keep my videos around 10 minutes, assuming they're just talk videos. Sometimes they get around like 15, 20, I know, but it depends on how long it takes me to explain things. Anywho, this is a longer video that I usually make. Yeah, good way to test out the performance on this thing. So what did we get? Very shocking results, and it'll actually explain to you why I switched to the MacBook Pro here, 13-inch, after this thing started performing terribly. So here we go. So I'm going to get the 16-inch out of the way here first because, I mean, duh. On this 26-minute 1080p 60 video recorded straight off of my iPhone, we took a total of 8 minutes and 44 seconds to export this. I am fine with that. That is a reasonable number. Oh, and the editor I am using this, I always use iMovie, and that's because it's free. And for free video editor, it's actually pretty good. Yeah, 8 minutes, 44 seconds in an iMovie export. That's fine. It's reasonable. I am perfectly fine with that. When we move to the 13-inch MacBook Pro here, we take like about a half hour more, to be honest. So here's the score for the 13-inch time. We've got 39 minutes and 49 seconds doing the same thing. Actually, that was a lot better than I expected. I expected it to take more like an hour or so, but it took like 2/3 what I expected. Now, here comes the reason why I stopped editing on this iMac here, and it's because the export time on this is so bad. Now, you might be thinking, well, it can't possibly be that much worse because, I mean, 2009 to 2011, the chips in this aren't exactly that different. This thing is allowed to draw higher power, and this thing is also clocked higher. So this thing can't do that much worse within the 2-year difference. Oh, but it can. And I mean, it can. You want to know the time that this thing took to export the same thing that these two were able to do in less than an hour? 4 hours. 38 minutes and 52 seconds. That's how long it took. These two laptops here are able to export it in less than an hour. This thing does it in over 4.5. That is why I stopped using this thing for editing. It's because exports took way too freaking long to actually do it. I am so grateful that I no longer have to deal with those slow times, but also don't have to deal with a small screen in the first place. That is basically my performance testing that I've done. I wanted to do a music test, except that would have taken way too long to set up because it takes me a while to actually get everything on beat and such. So I have not done that. Eventually, later on, I might actually do another performance test where I've made my own test benches because I wanted to see how my workflow works across them. But then again, for the most part, my workflow is video editing. That's what I do. So what we got? That is absolutely nuts on the performance testing. And yeah, I know not the best computers to compare these two, but I was actually curious to see how these two are actually performing. I wanted to see what results they would get in the same benchmarks that this thing would get. Oh, we shut off. So with that in mind, I am taking this away as I got a much better editing machine, a much better laptop that I can take with me everywhere too. And this thing is still basically going to be just a graphics prop. Didn't actually put the logo up this time. Oh well, didn't need to because the video is about all three of these computers anyway. So yeah, those are my performance tests. Take it or leave it as you please, but that's what I got. My next video I'm going to work on is actually a comparison between not just this laptop, but also this one here, and completely touch on so many of the features. And then I'll eventually work on the full review of this thing. So yeah, I got a couple more videos on the pipeline to milk some content out of this. I know, sorry if you guys don't want to see this thing, but well, I'm excited, and a lot of the internet, especially in the Mac community, they're excited about this too. That's pretty much it for me. I'm going to shut up now. Thank you for watching this really bad comparison. But anywho, thank you for watching. Do me a favor and interact with the stuff below. My name is Alpha DeWolf, Random Alpha, signing out.